Hey friends, welcome to the next installment of Global Outreach Fundraising Training where we believe God provides and fundraising is ministry. I'm CEO John Darnell and I'm excited for our VP of Development, Greg Buell, to lead us today. Greg, what are we focused on?
Yeah, today, John, we're going to talk about how to tell your story because we know stories are important and we want each of our candidates to be able to leverage the power of God's faithfulness by telling stories.
Mm, amen. Amen.
So let's jump in. We know that in the past sessions that our candidates have learned not only about inspiration and information, but they've also been given tools where they can develop their mission and vision. So we know those are in their toolkit. They're going to be able to use those in conversations. Another important part of conversations is storytelling.
Hmm.
And so there's still some work to be done, and we're here to fill in the gaps to help our missionaries be more effective in fundraising. So what's interesting, John, is that we know from brain science that data doesn't change our donors' minds.
Right.
And current brain scientists are studying this. They're doing detailed research. You have a little bit of that in a book that you're reading. If you want to tell us about that, John.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading this last night and knowing we were filming today and thinking about this story thing. This is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And there's a paragraph where he's talking about story. Let me read it to you. He says, we tend to use the word story casually, as if stories and narratives were ephemeral decorations for some unchanging underlying reality. The deeper neurological truth is that stories do not cloak reality, but create it, triggering cascades of perception and motivation. So the proof is in brain scans. When we hear a fact, a few isolated areas of our brain light up, translating words and meanings. When we hear a story, however, our brain lights up like Las Vegas, tracing the chains of cause, effect, and meaning. Stories are not just stories. They are the best invention ever created for delivering mental models that drive behavior.
I love that, John. Like there's this science that's going into it to figure out where the brain lights up. But you know who also knew how to get the brain to line up? It's a little old school. It's going ways back, John.
Ways back.
But
Jesus.
Yeah, you're right. That's like the Sunday school answer, but it's also the right answer today.
Ooh, I'm relieved.
Stories. I mean, we know Jesus used parables and stories to paint these powerful pictures about what it would look like if we lived out faith and moved past the laws and data, if you will. So think about that. Think about the fact that laws and data are really what the Pharisees used. Very black and white, very clear. I'm a black and white thinker, John. You know that.
Yes.
But I do realize that stories are what change people's minds. And so I think that's an important part of what we're going to be talking about today is how to tell those stories. I'm going to put up this image that's shared from one of my colleagues at Better Fundraising Company. I apologize there for missing their name for a second. Offered this to us to think about, which is where does our donor fit in helping? In other words, our story has to offer the donor a piece of the puzzle where they can fit into telling their role of how they're going to solve the story. And our hearts are made the same way. Our hearts of the people of Jesus's time, or our hearts are similar to the hearts of Jesus's time, in that we relate to stories. We feel the need, and our hearts are called to action. Again, our Western civilization way of thinking is facts and data and bullet points on PowerPoint slides, and got to have my 8-page proposal with all the financial figures figured out. What's really going to move people are the stories today. And so today, John, we're going to talk about that. And we need to allow these prospective donors to see how they fit in. And that's why I love this image that I've shared on screen briefly here, as it allows the donor to see how they fit into the story to become a solution. So how do we tell a story? So it's one thing to know that we need a story, but how do we begin to frame out what those are? And so that's what we're going to spend the last part of this time together discussing, John, is what is a framework we could use? My goal at the end of the session is that each of these candidates would be able to have 3 or 4 stories that they could use in different contexts with different donors. As we meet with donors, we need to understand their passions and interests. And so each of us should be able to choose the effective story for that conversation to move the donor in the best way possible, based on what their heart and their desires are for. So the framework I want to share today really only contains 4 pieces. It's fairly simple. The first point is it needs to have one name. This is an archetype of the story. This is not about a group of 27 people. This is not about 4 years of time. It's about one story so that the donor can give themselves something to hang their hat on as they're listening to this.
Greg, and I think about stories where there's multiple names and multiple things going on, and I get lost. So one name, so we can hold on to it, right?
Yep. I mean, think about any novel. We always come back to the main character. There's always one main character that we can hold on to amongst all the other pieces going on around them. So that's right. What we provide the donor in our stories. We also want to provide our donor very few details. This is the anti-novel, to use that example that I just noted. We want to give them just enough information for them to understand the context of what needs to be done. We don't need to tell them about what the cloud formations look like that day. We don't need to tell them about how many years we had been at this business, how many conversations we'd had with this person. We just need to give them the facts of what's necessary to move them through the story. And finally, John, maybe most importantly, we need to offer them one lesson. What's the one thing we want them to take away from the story? We want them to remember the story. They might be telling a friend about it the next day. They might be telling their small group about it the next week. What's that one lesson that they're going to be able to remember easily as they walk away from the story? And then finally, so that we don't lose the power of the story, we want an invitation. We want to follow up the story immediately with an invitation for this person to join us in the important work that God has called us to. And so, John, let's spend a couple minutes talking about our mission and vision, thinking about the exercises we just completed. What stories come to mind that will help us think through how to call people to what God's called us to? Yeah. So what do you have in mind as we look ahead at how we can tell effective stories?
What comes to mind, we use the Good Shepherd's Fold, the children's home in Uganda. We know that they're working with children, providing childcare advocacy education. So that context is already established for the donor. So you would want, if you're a missionary working there, you'd want to tell a story about one of the children that needs help. We need to make sure that there's room for the donor here. So I'm imagining, hey, Greg, my donor, Greg, let me tell you about a child named Moses. So Moses came to us when he was 4, and he's malnourished, and his body looks bad. Man, I could tell the moment I met him that his growth was stunted. His trying to help him with his classwork, and he can't read. He needs a donor. He needs someone to step in and save his life and provide the resources for medical care, nutrition, and education so that he can live a healthy, thriving life. Will you be the donor that steps in and ensures that he has what he needs and deserves to be healthy and growing?
You mean, John, how could I not say yes to that? I mean, you painted this picture that has a clear solution.
Right.
Makes me understand where I can fit in that piece of the puzzle and solves the problem.
Right.
That you've given me. You aren't asking me to take care of an entire village of folks. You aren't asking me to feed 1 million people. You've just given me the name of one person who needs help in particular areas. And so I love that. John, can I tell you a story?
Yeah, tell me a story, Greg.
John, I think back to some missionaries of ours who work in Chad and surrounding areas in Africa. And I think back to a story that they relayed to me a couple years ago, which is Sim works to train pastors throughout all of French-speaking Africa. And he also provides Bibles in their languages when he goes to trainings. And a couple years back, he told me that just in the past year, he had not been able to go to 5 different trainings because they didn't have a vehicle to get there. Mm. He had Bibles provided by his donors. They were all paid for. They were printed. He had them in his possession. Each conference had about 800 to 900 pastors lined up to attend to receive biblical training and to receive these Bibles in their own languages where they could share with the people around them. And because he didn't have a vehicle, days before each training, he would have to call the host or the leader of these trainings and say, "I'm sorry, I can't come." Think about the lost opportunity. Think about the souls that didn't get reached. Think
Yeah.
about the word that didn't get spread. And so, John, today I'm inviting you to give so that Sem and Eunice can raise the $14,000 they need to be able to reach. I mean, it's such a small price to pay to reach thousands of people. Think about each training being nearly 1,000 pastors and the outreach that they have. $14,000 is all he needs to get him a vehicle so he can have something reliable to get to those trainings that he missed last year and be able to move and provide that gospel hope that he wasn't able to provide. Will you join and invest in that effort?
Absolutely. Where do I sign up? I mean, think about it though, Greg. What that story, what you did for me is you helped me connect with, man, if I give, the gospel goes out. You know, here's my little piece of the puzzle where I fit in. I provide the car,
Yep.
the gospel goes out. And the rest of the story is he did raise that money for that car very quickly.
He did. He put a nice Global Outreach logo on the side, and he sent us pictures of it. It was fantastic to see. So again, God provides, but when we learn how to tell that story, it really helps that be a powerful tool in the hands of the donor. So hopefully that gives you all a sense of how to tell a story. It gives you a little model. Again, one person, one archetype, very few details, one lesson, and then an invitation. So hopefully that provides you a tool and a resource to move forward with. Next up, we're going to continue to explore how you can outline the opportunity the donor has through your ministry. And we'll talk about that next.